Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the MEVB team. So before we kick off our day of panels, it's my privilege to have the opportunity to share with you some interesting trends and insights about tech and entrepreneurship in the MENA region. And I wanted to start out with kind of a big picture, which we will hopefully see. Maybe I'll stand over here.
Point this way.
So we're going to start by taking a quick look at investments in MENA by quarter. And what I want to start first by telling you how we calculated this data. This data only includes deals done in MENA-based startups, or I would say Arab-based startups. We do not include Turkey. We do not include Pakistan in these deals. We are including all announced deals. So if there are some private deals that took place, data might not be here. We do not include any acquisitions in the values of the investments that we're sharing here. And what we can look at here immediately and we can see is that this is quarter by quarter data. Starting in 2019, in the early quarters of 2019, the region is seeing $150 million of investments per quarter. That's the line graph. And if we fast forward to 2021, we see this number doubling up to $500 million, and then over $1 billion in just the last quarter, third quarter of this year alone, right? The same thing we see when we look at the number of transactions, from 40 to 50 transactions per quarter up to 120, 150 transactions per quarter. And this has really accelerated just in 2021. And we saw that actually in Waleed's chart, where 2021 was kind of shooting up all by itself, right? If we dive into a little bit further and we see where are the biggest players in the market in terms of countries, and what we see is the top 4 markets have been relatively consistent, with the number 1 market being the UAE. And this is ranked by value of investments. You can see the value at the far side. The UAE has been number 1 across 5 years, and in 2021, just the first 3 quarters, the UAE has seen over $1 billion worth of transactions. Saudi and Egypt coming in second and third place, and we can see Egypt really kind of jumping from 6th place up to 3rd. But if we look at the absolute numbers between, almost 500 million in Egypt, in Saudi, 400 million in Egypt, they're still quite small relative to the UAE, less than 50% of the size of the UAE market in terms of value of transactions. If we go to the 4th market, which has been consistently Jordan, that's just $50 million in investment. So we're talking about an order of magnitude. And we're going to look at this a little bit further when we look at the concentration of deals in the top 4 markets. These are the countries that I would say are either solid, consistent, that's in yellow, and so Kuwait hovering between 5 and 7 ranking, Bahrain hovering from 7 to 9, and Morocco hovering between 9 and 12, right? Consistent, solid markets, there's good investment activity. Markets on the rise, Algeria, which kind of shows up out of the blue a little bit, just in last year with 2 major transactions that happened in this year, driving $40 million almost of transactions. And Qatar, which has jumped up from 14th place to 9th place in 2021. And here I have to say thank you to Digital Digest. This data has been a collaboration between Arabnet and Digital Digest, and of course with the insights from MEVP helping us shape the thinking around what are really the most important trends that are taking place in the region. And sadly, we do have losers in the market. The one that breaks my heart personally is Lebanon, dropping from 2nd place in 2017 all the way down to 11th place with only $4 million of investment in 2021. And Tunisia, which is actually quite active, and you can just see it from 5th to 7th to 8th to 10th, 13, really dropping in the rankings in terms of investment. As I was mentioning, the investments in the region are really concentrated, and here we look at the concentration just in the top 4 markets. And this is a number of deals, and we're going to see value of deals shortly. But what we can see here is, if you look, the top is all the rest of the markets, right? In 2017, all the rest of the markets, other than the top 4, made up 40%. That means 60% were in the top 4 markets. By 2021, that becomes 80% of all market activity, deals, are taking place in just the top 4 markets. And that concentration is on the rise. And when we look at the split, with Jordan being still relatively small, it's actually roughly even when we look at number of transactions between Saudi, Egypt, and the UAE. This does not hold quite when we look at value, right? Still, we see a deep concentration, even more concentration, where dollars are going regionally, with 85% of all dollars going to the top 4 markets in 2017, up to 95% of all dollars going into the top 4 markets by 2021. But what we do see here, really interestingly, is UAE dropping from 70% of all dollars down to 50%, and we do see Saudi and Egypt really picking up. Egypt going from just 2% up to 17% of all dollar transactions, and Saudi going from 6% to 20% of all dollars transacted, right? So really, where UAE was predominant just 5 years ago, Saudi and Egypt have really picked up the game. The other thing that we've seen in the region is a rapid increase in large transactions, transactions over $10 million. And if we just look at this, in 2019, there were only 13 transactions over $10 million. By 2021, there were 39 transactions, a tripling of the number of transactions over $10 million. And if we look at the value, those value represented $300 million in 2019, fivefold up to $1.6 billion. So the growth stage is really, really booming very quickly. Or we can also say valuations are on the rise and investments are on the rise. And, you know, we'll see about your thoughts on this later in one of our polls. If we look at where these large-scale deals are taking place, again, we see the big concentration in the top markets. UAE going from 8 to 20 deals over the last 3 years. Egypt from 2 to 8 deals. More large deals in 2021 in Egypt than even in Saudi. Saudi jumping up to 7 deals. But it's not just in those markets. We are seeing large-scale deals in Jordan, in Kuwait, in Bahrain. So this is not just in the top 3 markets. It's actually a broader trend across the industry. If we look at sectors, which I think is really interesting, this is sectors by number of transactions. Finance really dominating the interest in terms of the sectors. 156 deals over the last 3 years in finance, in fintech. Enterprise SaaS coming in 2nd place, logistics in 3rd, e-commerce in 4th, and then we can see, but this is a pretty significant jump, right? From 150 for 1st place down to 70 for 2nd place, half of that. So really, fintech is a big driver of what's going on in the region from number of transactions. And that's consistent also when we look at value, $612 million captured in the fintech space in the last 3 years. Cloud kitchens, we didn't see them in the number of transactions, only a few transactions, but they have dominated the value, over $516 million poured into cloud kitchens, really driven significantly by the Katopi transaction, which many of you will probably be aware of. But then again, we see enterprise SaaS and logistics. So these are 3 of the dominant sectors that we all need to be aware of: finance, enterprise SaaS, logistics. Another trend we've seen is the participation of international investors, significant participation of international investors. So from 2019, if we look at just the line, that number increased from 50 international investors participating in deals up to 125 international investors in 2021. And all data for 2021 is just 3 quarters, right? We haven't finished quarter 4. And so this is pretty much really live data as of now, as much as possible. And we can see the red here is the deals with international investors, up to 108 deals with the participation of internationals. And if we look at this by stage, what we'll see is that the rounds with international investors, that's in blue here, really are dominating in the later stage. Early stage tend to be regional investors, mostly driven by regional investors. At the accelerator phase, almost 95%. By the time you get to Series A, almost 80% of all rounds in the Series C have international investors in them. And this is clearly a market opportunity for potential growth funds in the region. There's also been a lot of acquisitions taking place in the region, up from 24 acquisitions in 2019 to 31 in 2021. Here you can look at the type of acquirers in the region. And what we can see is actually there's a lot of startup activity, right? Here we call startup, which is a small tech company. And in red, you'll see TechCo, that's a larger tech company. And we can see the biggest growth area is startup transactions. Now, that could be consolidation in the market in some sectors that are struggling, but it could also be startups growing through acquisition. And we've seen success stories like this. Kareem grew through acquisition across the region. So this could be a really interesting strategy looking forward. We have also seen more of holding companies and corporates. Corporates is a single entity. Holding groups are families that have multiple potential operating companies. Those are increasing. Private equity is still a relatively small player in the acquisitions here, at least. I want to take a little bit of time also to talk about some interesting trends that we've seen, driven by specific transactions. And since we talked a lot about fintech and the numbers in fintech, I wanted to talk about fintech first, and the first trend really being buy now, pay later. We've seen a huge number of dollars invested in buy now, pay later. Tamara in Saudi Arabia raising over 116 million, including debt. Tabi raising 123 million plus, including debt. There is a boom right now in venture debt, as a lot of these fintechs and other companies need all of this debt for working capital. We've seen the announcement of a number of venture debt funds in the region. Postpay, an order of magnitude less in the UAE, capturing $10 million. But buy now, pay later is only one space. We have Mint Halan, which is an MEVP portfolio company. They've raised $146 million. And they're kind of more like a multi-fintech provider. They do buy now, pay later, as well as business lending, personal finance. And we've also seen the business lending space, interesting opportunities there with Lendo in Saudi raising $7 million. Payment acceptance, especially for SMEs and corporations, that's been on the rise. And these are like companies that turn your smartphone into a POS or allow you to issue payment invoices through a link or a QR code. And what we can see here, Hala in Saudi Arabia raising 7 million, Paymob raising 18.5, and Nomad raising $4 million. But they're not alone. Certainly here, Zbooni, which is a really interesting one, has more of a social twist, empowering businesses to do e-commerce through things like WhatsApp, raising 10.6 million, and Foodix, which has raised 28 million and doing more sector-focused, specifically for F&B. Investment in wealth management has been another area of really interesting deals taking place. Wahed, which is actually New York-based, but we thought important because this is focused on Sharia-compliant or ethical investing. They've raised $40 million plus. Sarwa has raised $25 million for their robo-advisory and investment management. And they've also recently launched trading, no-fee trading in the region. And that's potentially, in relation to Baraka, which is the newest entrant of this group, has only raised 4 million, but is very much focused on the trading side of things. Crypto exchanges, as Walid was mentioning, crypto is on the rise. He's encouraging everyone. I would buy a portfolio. I don't think I can figure out which of the cryptos is going to do well, but here are 3 amazing crypto exchanges and platforms in the region. Rain, which has raised $31 million, and where you should expect an exciting new announcement very soon. BitOasis that has raised 30 million, and CoinMENA that has raised almost $10 million. And so, the numbers, I'm kind of going through them quickly, but they're really there for indication of where the trends are and how you can see where the money is going in the market. Another is digital wallets and peer-to-peer payments. When I was last in the US, everyone was talking about Venmoing each other. Venmo became a verb. And I think now in the region, we're seeing a significant rise in this peer-to-peer payments and digital wallets. Zena raising 8.5 million, MamoPay 9.5 million, and Telda raising 5 million. Still on the relatively smaller stage. These are still earlier stage than some of the more established deals that we've been talking about before. Moving from fintech, cloud kitchens, we saw it dominating. Kitopi, of course, the beast in this space, $504 million of total funding. Icon, which was the second player, really, which has raised 25 million, but really exciting because they've just been acquired, and a rumor around the acquisition value, something around $120 million. Of course, don't hold me to this, just hearsay, but a really exciting thing in the region. And then the cloud, which has a different spin on cloud kitchens, which I think is actually really interesting. One of the challenges that has been posed around cloud kitchens is the asset-heavy model and the investment in actually building the setup of cloud kitchens versus the cloud, which is more like a sharing economy cloud kitchen setup, where they allow, they use spare capacity in existing kitchens. And that would be a really exciting asset-light way to enter into the cloud kitchen space. B2B marketplaces have been on the rise. This is increasingly for like food and FMCG. We've seen Capital and Maksab in Egypt raising $33 and $45 million respectively, and Sari in Saudi Arabia raising $37 million. But it's not just in the B2B space. We've seen on-demand grocery on the rise. Everyone was stuck in their homes, needed to order. Finally, the revolution came to the grocery business. Two of the investments the big investments taken place. Breadfast raised $23 million. This is just this month, early November. These guys are based out of Egypt, and Nana Direct in Saudi, which has raised $29 million. Of course, the bigger player in this space is InstaShop, but we really wanted to highlight that InstaShop was acquired for $360 million by Delivery Hero. So this is already a huge success story in the region. And El Grocer, which was a smaller player here in the UAE market, acquired by Etisalat. Health tech is another area of significant activity. We've seen Visita in Egypt, and I've put here some bullet points because we are seeing a bit of convergence in what's going on in the health tech startups. They may have started in different areas, but are now converging together. Visita, which has raised $72 million, does appointment booking, telemedicine, and e-pharmacy. Udawi, which is particularly focused on e-pharmacy, raised $14 million. Atibbi, based out of Jordan, appointments, telemedicine, and medical content. Akadoc has raised $12 million for appointments and telemedicine, and Cura, based out of Saudi, raising $5 million, specifically focused on telemedicine. The last thing I want to mention is SPACs. As we've already said, SPACs are a powerful new platform for companies to go public, and we've seen two big SPACs announced in the region, Anghami, which has raised over $60 million in funding, and Swivel, which has raised $175 million. And actually, this brings us to our first poll. So please, I want you to pick up your phones, scan the QR code. We also have maybe COVID to thank for the fact that QR codes are now ubiquitous. But if you'll scan this QR code, share your opinion with us about SPACs. Take part in the poll, and we'll share with you the findings afterwards. It'll take a moment, and we'll give you a moment to do that.